Yes.
Mr. Swann, I'm going to ask you just to look at three documents with me on the issue of national and Northern Ireland developments in relation to parity. The first is at EIBS 30705, please, Seamus.
There's a digit missing there, I think.
EIBS 40705. So this is a letter we looked at yesterday with the witnesses from the Scottish Government, 21st of September 2020, from the Paymaster General to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And if we pick it up under the heading Financial Support, we can see reference there to ministers committed to address disparities across the UK in the levels of financial support provided by the four devolved schemes. And then it says, my officials have worked with departments of health across the four UK nations to cost providing parity of financial support. The total additional costs over the next 5 years are estimated to be approximately 161 million. And then we can see the figure for Northern Ireland is given as 6 million. And if we go to that figure, so if we go on, show it please, to page 4 of this. We can see the bottom half of the page, the figures for Northern Ireland, figures for bereaved partners, hepatitis C stage 1, stage 2, co-infected HIV lump sum payments, the £10,000 lump sum payment, and then the estimated cost of introducing special category mechanism or enhanced support for Hep C stage 1, and I'll ask you a bit more about that in a few minutes. But those are the costings submitted by your officials, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And that's based on, as it were, continuing what had been achieved by way of moving towards parity in the announcements that you'd made, but then bringing the Northern Ireland payments up to match, for example, the Scottish payments, and introducing a special category mechanism or equivalent. So this involves adding to the announcements you had already made by this point in time.
That is correct, and as you indicate, also the inclusion of the SCM.
But it doesn't reflect any kind of the costings for any more radical rewrite of the financial support scheme.
No, not at this point.
And so if we go back to the letter, so if we go back to page 1 of the document, please, Seamus. And we can see it under the heading Compensation for Victims. The Paymaster General sets out her view that it's inevitable the government will need to provide substantial compensation. And then if we go over the page, in her last paragraph, she says, I cannot stress enough the urgency of taking long overdue action on financial support and compensation. Now, I'll come on to the issue of compensation separately, if I may, so if we can leave that aside for the time being. Did the Northern Ireland Executive or your department have any involvement in the process of providing information to the Chancellor, or any involvement in the formulation of this letter, or was your involvement simply limited to providing the Northern Ireland costings?
As far as I'm aware, it was only to provide the costings.
And do you know whether this letter was shared with you or your department at the time?
I'm not aware that it was shared with us prior to being sent or after. It's not something that's in my recollection at this moment.
And have you ever seen any response from the Chancellor to this letter?
No.
Would you agree with the general statement we see in the last paragraph, the urgency of taking long overdue action on financial support and compensation?
I would, yes.
And then if we go to the announcement then some 6 months or so later by the Paymaster General, Seamus, we have it at WITN 4066017. WITN 4066017. You don't have that? Can we try another reference? RLIT 301498. Three zeros. Should have that. Can you try again? The first one, I think we did run through. WITN 4066017. We got it. Great. So we can see this is the Paymaster General's statement on the 25th of March 2021. And we can see she says, if we go further down the page, today I'm providing an update on parity of financial support, commitment to considering a compensation framework and enhancements to the psychological support. And then under the heading parity, she refers to UK-wide agreement in principle to resolve disparities in July 2019. Reference then to a meeting between the UK government and campaigners January 2020. And then she confirms changes planned to force the 4 separate schemes to bring them into broader parity. And if we just go a little further down the page, we can see reference then to the elements of change for England, and then bottom of the page, she says the schemes managed by the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will be similarly adapted so that across the UK there is broad parity of payments to infected and affected people. And if we go over the page, third paragraph, we can see what she says about Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the changes are to annual payments for non-infected bereaved spouses/partners, lump sum bereavement payments, and a commitment to introduce enhanced financial support for hepatitis C stage 1 at the same payment levels as in England as soon as a system can be put into operation. We've agreed with health ministers that any future changes to national schemes will be subject to consultation between the UK government and devolved administrations. And then there is the announcement in relation to the compensation framework, which I'll come back to. So that's the Paymaster General's announcement. Can we then look at your announcement? And then I'm going to ask some questions about the process. So you made an announcement on the same day, WITN 5570018. We can see the date is the same, 25th of March 2021. This statement provides an update on UK 4 nations cooperation to achieve greater parity of financial support for those infected and or affected by contaminated blood across the UK. And then you refer to the review of the scheme which was underway in Northern Ireland. Next paragraph refers to work between your department and other departments. And then if we go to the bottom half of the page, we can see it says this: subject to funding from HM Treasury, I have agreed to implement a number of changes to the Northern Ireland Infected Blood Payment Scheme, which are intended to achieve greater alignment in financial support across the UK schemes. The reforms are as follows. Payments for non-infected bereaved spouses or partners will increase from 75% of the deceased beneficiary's annual payment to an automatic 100% of the deceased beneficiary's payment in the first year, with 75% payable in subsequent years. This is in line with the policy in Scotland and will be backdated to the 1st of April 2019. Then second bullet point, the introduction of enhanced support payments for eligible hepatitis C stage 1 beneficiaries in line with rates paid in England and backdated to the 1st of April 2019, subject to a model being developed in consultation with stakeholders. Third is the £10,000 bereavement lump sum, you referred to this earlier, Mr. Swann, will now also be payable to the estate of the deceased in cases where there's no living spouse or partner, in line with the position in England and Wales. This will be backdated to the 1st of April 2017. And then finally, the lump sum payment to a hepatitis C stage 1 beneficiary will increase from 20,000 to 50,000. And you say that's a policy in line with the position in Scotland, will be backdated to the 1st of April 2017. And then, sorry, I said finally, but if we go over the page, there was one further element. Top of the page. the lump sum payment to an HIV beneficiary will increase from the current range of payments up to a maximum of 80,000 or 80,500, depending on circumstances, to an automatic 80,500 backdated to the 1st of April 2017. So I just have a number of questions arising out of both the process and the nature of the changes being made. Can we go back to the previous page, bottom half of the page? So we can see, Mr. Swann, that your announcement there is said to be subject to funding from HM Treasury. And we heard yesterday from your Scottish counterparts that they are still waiting for formal confirmation of the funding. What's the position in relation to Northern Ireland? Are you still waiting for some kind of confirmation from the Westminster government? And if so, what's your expectation?
My understanding is the expectation is that as this commitment has been made by the Paymaster General, that is a matter of process rather than any uncertainty of it.
So you are expecting the funding to be made? Yeah.
But we haven't formal, I suppose the formal either transferring funds or written confirmation at this point.
And when, leaving aside the issue of the enhanced support payments or special category mechanism model where further work is required, in terms of the other changes, the various increases in payment, what's your current expectation as to when you'll be able to implement those?
Well, we are currently waiting on that update from Cabinet Office, and I would hope to be receiving it soon. But Cabinet Office and Paymaster General will be best, I expect, placed to say exactly when that transfer will be made. But we've made it very clear in this that it is our intention to make these payments.
You obviously had some advance notice of the Paymaster General's announcement on the 25th of March because you were able to formulate your own statement, as we've seen. But what can you tell us further about the information that was provided to you, whether by the Department of Health and Social Care or the Cabinet Office in the course of March? How and when did you learn that additional funding was in principle going to be made available?
As I say, that was mostly done through official engagement, and the first ministerial level was actually the meeting that was held and chaired by the Paymaster General with the 4 ministers from the devolved authorities. So in regards to the announcement, that was done through collaboration between the departments, so there was a consistency of approach and messaging across all the devolved administrations, so that we did not cause the anxiety that further our previous announcements that had been made, when they were made in one part of the UK, that hadn't been made in line at the other parts and the other constituency parts as well, so that there was a coordination in the statements being released.
And did you know in advance of the 4 ministers meeting that took place in March that you've referred to, that the further funding that had been sought by the Paymaster General was going to be made available? Or was that communicated during the meeting or after?
That was communicated. That was communicated through the meeting.
And then, if we just then look at just some of the points of detail here, the payments for non-infected bereaved spouses or partners, backdated to the 1st of April 2019, has any consideration been given to backdating that further, at least to the inception of the scheme? And if so, what are the reasons for backdating only to 2019?
My understanding, and again, Ms. Richmond can maybe update that, but that was in line with the funding and making sure we were aligned across the DAs, and that's why that date was suggested. I'm not sure of any further rationale for that being appointed at this time, but if there is, I can provide that in writing to you.
And then in relation to the second bullet point, the question of enhanced support, again, do you know why that's going to be backdated only to April 2019, bearing in mind that I think in England the special category mechanism had been introduced in the autumn of 2017?
I'm not aware why that date is specifically mentioned at that point.
What's the plan in terms of the model? Because obviously this is your statement suggests that there is still work to be done on a model and a proposal of consultation with stakeholders. What's your best estimate of how long the process of developing that model is going to take?
With the team that we have working, I have committed to the introduction of that enhanced support payment for those who are eligible, and officials will shortly commence that work on developing that assessment model, actually in consultation with stakeholders, and this work unfortunately has unavoidably been delayed due to the urgent work that we are taking required to do because of requests for information in the inquiry, specifically in the recent weeks. We only have a small team within the department who have both responsibility for the work in regards to the Northern Ireland scheme, but also supporting the inquiry work as well. So it is my intention that we get on with that work, and that process will commence in consultation and partnership with the stakeholders themselves as well.
Now, we know there are different approaches in the other nations. England has the special category mechanism, which is dependent upon clinical assessment. Scotland, as we heard yesterday, uses a form of self-declaration, self-assessment, and we'll hear about Wales tomorrow. Is there currently any particular model favoured by the Department of Health?
That if there is that option, or those options have not been presented to me as of yet until that work is completed, and again in consultation and working with the stakeholders.
And then in relation to the other items set out here, we can see they are going to be backdated to April 2017, so a longer period of time, but obviously still a cut-off, so that those whose, for example, in relation to the bereavement lump sum, who died before that will not benefit from it. Again, are you able to cast any light on the thinking as to why those dates have been chosen?
I don't have that detail in front of me, either in regards of 17 or 19, but as I say, if Ms Richmond can't answer that question, I'll get that correspondence to the inquiry in writing.
We can take that down, thank you, Chair Mick. I just wanted to ask you finally about the Paymaster General's announcement of work on a compensation framework. Was that something which had been raised with or communicated to you or to the Department of Health in Northern Ireland in advance of the Paymaster General's announcement?
It hadn't been raised with me as Minister, but I can't comment if it had already been discussed at an official level, but I wasn't cited of it as Minister.
Do you or the department have any particular expectations as to what your involvement might be in the process of developing a compensation framework?
I would hope we'd be fully involved, because if we are approaching this as a four-nation piece of work, it should involve my department officials as well, but it also should involve the stakeholders as well, of those who have been infected and affected by the contaminated blood.
And in general, would you agree that it is imperative that changes are made as soon as possible, if they are going to be made, because people are continuing to suffer and indeed continuing to die?
Most definitely.
And do you share the view expressed by the Paymaster General in that September 2020 letter to the Chancellor, that it's inevitable that the government will need to provide substantial compensation to the infected and affected communities?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Mr Swann, those are the questions I have for you, but I'm conscious of the need to allow core participants through their recognised legal representatives to suggest further questions. So perhaps we could take another break, which would enable any further questions to be suggested to me, and then we can conclude Mr Swann's evidence after that.
Yes. How long do you think you might need?
Well, if we came back at 12:15, I think that should afford sufficient opportunity. I've already asked a number of the questions that had already been suggested in advance.
Well, let's do that then. Mr Swann, you will certainly be free, I predict, by 1 p.m. Today to go back to your day job, if I can call it that. Though this, I suspect, is part of it. We'll take a break till 12:15, 12 and see what further questions there may be for you then.
Thank you, Sir Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.